Hi guys, this is Mordred from Mordred's Monsters, and I'm starting my new Patreon-funded goal project thing of the Query series. It's going to be a series of answering questions from my patrons, and one of the questions that I've got is which type of clay do I like to use the best? And unfortunately that's not an easy answer because the real answer is I like different clays for different reasons. So let's talk about it. I went over this in my panel at TFF with Manayasha from Dream Vision Creations, our advanced costume materials panel. That's up on my YouTube. You can click on that link and check it out because it's like 2.5 hours of awesome discussion. Yeah, so the clay that I like to use for bigger projects and stuff is Jolly King. Jolly King is cheap, it's really soft, it's pretty flexible, you can squish it and move it pretty easily, which makes making things like masks and larger things, sometimes feet and padding. Mordred's padding is all done with Jolly King on a sculpted duct tape dummy. So the only downside to this is that it's kind of sticky. It will get on your hands and leave a residue. And if it gets too warm, it will sag and bend, and it can get a little bit heavy when you're making the big sculpts. But the other thing as well is it says it's sulfur free, like all plasticines that you're using with silicone should be, but it has enough of a trace of sulfur in it where platinum cure silicones like dragon skin tend to still stay sticky. They'll cure, but the inside of the mold will always be sticky. The inside of this mold is actually sticky, but it's still usable. I still like it. It works really well with tin cure stuff, like I think Rebound is. I don't use Rebound. Don't know. And also with the Ugu mix that I use, the cornstarch and silicone caulking mix. So that's Jolly King. Monster clay I like a lot because it gets really, really good texture detail to it. And it is actually sulfur free, so you can use it with any of the silicones and not have a real serious issue with things being sticky. This stuff here, I believe it's wax based, and you can put it in the oven and melt it down to make it nice and soft. So unlike the other one, you can't just wipe it and have it slide around. This is kind of a more medium firmness. I like to use it for noses. I like to use it for smaller sculpts. It's a little bit difficult to get out of ultracal molds, so I prefer to use it with silicone molds only. Whereas the Jolly King comes out of the ultracal molds a lot easier. This is the nose from Solstice, actually. Let's see. I also use, this is Chavant NSP Hard. This is one of the original teeth that I made for Gondwana a couple years ago. This stuff is really, really hard. You pretty much have to melt it down before you can use it. You can smash it, and it really doesn't deform or change shape. I like to use it for anything that needs a whole lot of texture, like claws or anything like that. You can sand it down, you can smooth it really easily when it's nice and hot, but as soon as it gets chilled, it doesn't ever really move again until you heat it back up. So that's super good for doing stuff like jaw sets and teeth and claws and other things that really need to be tooled and put into other things. One thing I like to do with that is to make the teeth with the hard and embed that into one of the softer clays for the gums. And that allows you to reposition the teeth as necessary and move the gums around without damaging your actual sculpt here. But what I have moved to recently for doing my sculpts, especially with noses and tongues, is Sculpey 3. It's polymer clay, and it's a plastic-based clay, essentially. You can heat it up in the oven. I believe it's 275 degrees, 15 minutes per quarter inch. But It's also sulfur free. I've used it with dragon skin with no ill effects. And for whatever reason, I find that I can smooth it a lot better and get nicer imprints from my texture stamps into it. And that allows me to get really fine detail. I'm going to be using it today to, a black version of it anyways, to do the canine tongue sculpt and texture process for Tiberius for the Monster Manual. So if you're curious as to what clay I'm going to be using in that video, it's definitely going to be Sculpey, because it behaves really well for taking the textures and such. A second question I've gotten recently is, what is my favorite type of mold to make? And that's another one of those really tricky ones, because it kind of depends on the application. You can do pour molds, like this nifty tiger paw pad mold that I used with Nirvana. This is an ultracal mold. The reason that I prefer to do ultracal molds for paw pads and such is it's a nice flat surface, so it's very easy to just lay it down on a table and make a good mold box and properly get your texture and stuff, because the paw pads don't have quite as much texture to grab as, say, a nose or a tongue, and it makes it pretty quick. The ultracal dries in about 45 minutes, and then you can go right into casting into it, and it's very effective to use. You can also do a pour mold with silicone. This is dragon skin. This was actually Kieran's nose mold. I like the silicone pour molds for things like noses and tongues and such that need a lot of texture detail to be captured in them, because you can't quite get as much with the ultracal as you can with the silicone. I used to do ultracal on noses as well, but I've since moved to using the silicone. Specifically Dragon Skin 20 is my favorite, because it lets me get the detail that I need, and with enough mold release in there you can still cast silicone into it, which is fantastic for getting things to be very, very texture oriented, which is how I prefer to do things. You can also do two-part molds. This is an ultracal two-part mold. This is Kieran's tongue. For when you can't get a piece out in a one-part mold, or if you need to lay a texture or a different color on, like, there'd be no way to really get your finger up inside of a thin tongue mold like that. So this way you can separate it and put the texture, the color on the one side, and then the pink on top, and then the pink on the bottom, and squeeze it together and still be able to get out your piece. With two-part molds, you have a seam along wherever they meet, but it's pretty easy to trim that up. You can do two-part molds with silicone or with ultracal. I haven't done one with silicone yet. I haven't found the need to quite yet. I probably will be doing one for the Monster Manual, so that will be exciting. And the other type of mold that I use a lot is a glove and mother mold set. Sometimes you can do a mother mold that is one piece. Usually they need to be two. You use a mother mold whenever you have a lot of undercuts, because you can take the silicone and make a very detailed mold here that's thin enough to be able to peel off of your very complicated structure easily enough. This is my still sticky dragon skin from my Jolly King sculpt that I showed a little bit earlier. But then you can invert that back, and this mother mold allows the structure to be maintained while you rotocast or try to jam foam into it. This is a foam mold, so the mother mold here keeps it from expanding out too far and distorting the shape. And then it's just a matter of closing them around your piece, and then you can rotocast and it'll retain its form, or you can put foam in it and it will retain its form. This is also the method that I use for mask bases and usually for horns. Overall, I think I use this one most, but it's kind of more tedious to do. It's just more steps. It just takes a little bit longer. I would have to say that my favorite way of doing a mold is the Ultra Cal pour molds, just because they're simple. You mix up the Ultra Cal to the consistency of pancake batter, you pour it in, you walk away for 45 minutes, you come back, you lift out your mold, and you do your casting. It's pretty easy. So, now I'm filthy. These are the molds that I use most often. There are some other specialty ones where matrix molding, and where you can cut your piece out or put a bunch of seam lines in it and have multiple parts to the mold. The only time I've ever had to use more than a two-piece mold like this is on foot paws. Kieran's feet have 3 parts. It has a bottom and 2 sides, and the mold comes open. The glove mold comes open in the center so that I can get the casting out. But that pretty much covers the mold types that I usually use, and yeah, that pretty much takes care of it. Thank you for tuning in to the first edition of Mordred's Query Series. This is for patrons to get their questions answered. You can join in on this for as little as $1 a month by joining my Patreon and helping support me creating this awesome art and all these tutorials and stuff for you. Thank you, and if you have questions, drop them to me on Patreon. Thanks!